Welcome to the show. Chris Graham here with Rod Mullins. It's Monday. We talk NASCAR on Monday. And boy, what a race in Kansas. Got a late start with a rain delay.
Mhm.
And, for the first little bit there, I guess not a lot to talk about. And then just a series of crashes that slowed things down, got restart after restart after restart. One coming late in the race that changed the way things would end up. Denny Hamlin seemed like he was poised to get another win.
Yep.
And then all we saw was literally the closest finish in NASCAR history. Rod, tell us what happened.
I'll tell you, I thought the Kentucky Derby was close Saturday. This one was even closer. And yeah, this one was by 0.001, I think is what it was. Point
Yeah,
zero zero one. Don't
yeah.
ask me to do the math thing. I'm not, a math person. But yeah, the closest race ever in NASCAR history. And you look at that photo finish again, and it's by at least, I think what the estimates was, an inch. I think that's what it was. It was by an inch. And I'm telling you, it was a free for all there at the end of it. And Kyle Larson just, he decided to make his move, which was great on his part. Came around. Chase Elliott came around too. Chase Elliott was going to finish looking to, come away with the win on this one. He raced in the top five. And then lo and behold, Chris Buescher, they were fighting for the position. And then Larson crosses the start finish line. And I'm sure there was some pivotal moments where people were wondering who won the race. What camera angle? How did, NASCAR always has that camera angle there at the start finish line, regardless, one way or the other. Then they would have relied on telemetry, what would have been coming in from, all their little boxes that they have on the cars and so forth. But I tell you, it was a close race, no doubt about it. It was, I think, more than probably Kansas had ever given us before in such a way. It was a race down to the very end. Like you said, the weather was not the greatest in the world. Thought we were going to maybe not even have a race at one point because of the way the weather was. But they came back and they managed to replay it back and get. Well, I guess it was, what was it? Maybe after 9 o'clock Eastern time, after at least before, a little bit before, a little after 9 o'clock Eastern time, before this race was even finished. So, kudos to NASCAR for wanting to get this thing over with and wanting to try to push on. But the cautions at the end of it, I tell you, that jostled everything around. And Denny Hamlin, like you mentioned, he was, looked like he was poised to get one, and he let one slip right out of his fingertips.
The strategy going into those last several laps before that crash, I think it was 5 laps to go. The only question it seemed like, we heard from the Fox crew
Mm-hmm.
that they, I guess, overheard the discussion. Somebody there overheard the discussions on the radio that the Hamlin team wondered if they had enough gas to make it. He was
Yeah.
having to like let off the throttle for stretches there, and there was lap traffic he was trying to get through and all that kind of stuff. And so, so there was all that discussion for a few laps. And then when that crash happened, 5 laps to go, everything changed. And we ended up with that green white finish. That was, I mean, so the strategy there was interesting. Could
Mm-hmm.
Hamlin last that long? Then, I mean, we get to that stage, that restart. Hamlin got blown off the
Yeah.
line pretty much and fell way back. It was interesting to see how all it play out, the strategy, and then as soon as everybody was back on equal terms, it was a drag race at the finish, basically.
Yeah, I got finished this past week talking with somebody that just said to me point blank, said, I don't like racing. And I said, that's fine. You can not like racing. They said, I don't know what you see that's so interesting about it when you go and cover races. And I tried to tell them again, it is not just the whole process of watching a bunch of cars running around in a circle all day or going on a road course. It is a matter of strategy, is a matter of, do you have enough gas in the car? Do you have the right set of tires on? Do you have everything in place? Are you making good enough pit stops that can make you competitive or keep you competitive throughout the day, or at least be there when that checkered flag falls? And it's hard to kind of explain something to an absolute novice who just kind of looks at you and says, I still don't get it, what it's all about. But to me, it's much more than just this going around in circles. And I talked to a couple of guys this past week that also said to me that they miss the old racing. True, I do miss the old racing too, but this time around with this next generation car, we've been treated to some equal parity, so to speak, with a lot of these race teams. For example, Justin Haley, looking at the unofficial results, now official results, finished 18th yesterday. He had a good run altogether right there. But then on the flip side of this, you go down the line and you start seeing some other people that kind of bit the dust early that you would have expected to be at least, in good standing. Jimmy Johnson didn't even finish the race, had an accident. You had Austin Cindric, who's been running, in the top 20 in some of these races at different times. He didn't finish the race, had an accident. Harrison Burton, he didn't have any luck. Joey Logano had another poor performance there, finishing up at 34th. Ty Gibbs dropped down, finished 32nd. We saw a lot more parity, I think, this time around. And of all things, Kyle Busch comes into the top 10 again, another top 10 win, or top 10 for him, finishing 8th, just like his car number. But Noah Gragson, I think Stuart Haas is starting to take hold with Noah Gragson. He comes in at 9th. Wow, it was just a good run for some of these cars yesterday, especially at Kansas, because Kansas is a difficult track.
One thing I was surprised by on that last restart, while we were watching it live, my wife Crystal and I was telling Crystal, there's going to be a wreck before they get
Oh
back to the
yeah.
start finish line, before they get to that white flag. And I was surprised there wasn't. But then we saw a lot of bumping between the two guys who ended up first and second by that
Mhm.
one thousandth of a second. And Scott Rod, I was watching that replay as you were talking there a couple times. I still don't know how Buescher didn't win.
Yeah, I don't know either. And that's just one of those that it's just I don't know how you could have had it any other way if you'd had a drone or something up above to see it from up top side or anything. But yeah, Buescher just definitely Buescher put together just a great run right there toward the end of the race. But I think Buescher was probably more than anything else. He was just kind of disappointed that wasn't supposed to be, because his comment was after the race, he said that sucks to be that close. And I agree with him. It is, second place is the biggest loser. That's what Dale Earnhardt used to say about things. And Buescher even overcame a penalty during this race for a pit crew member over the wall too soon during a stage 2 break. And although it was a great finish for Buescher and company, there was a lot of speed in that Mustang that they had out on the track. They needed to win more than anything else. And he said, I thought we might have had this one, and it wasn't to be that day.
One thing that's curious is you talked about the next gen car and how, it's so much parity and everything else. It's just from week to week, teams with their setups, can either get more speed out of the car or less. And I bring that up in the context of Bubba Wallace. I was watching him in the last 60, 70 laps. He would flirt with, I mean, there was a time he was in third there for a good while, and he started drifting back, drifting back. At one point he was like 2.7 seconds behind. He eventually, I mean, there was a point he got lapped,
Mm-hmm.
and only got back on the lead lap because of the lucky dog on that last wreck with 5 laps to go. But I mean, I lost track of him at one point when he went from less than 3 seconds behind to getting lapped. That just shows that from week to week, you can either have a fast car or you can have one that just can't compete.
I wonder if your odds are better if you go to a casino. I mean, the way that some of these cars are getting set up and the way some of these cars are doing, you just kind of wonder to yourself, do I have better odds going to casino and maybe winning a couple of quarters or something as opposed to, winning a race? It's kind of hit or miss. That's what it's kind of become with this whole thing. What they thought worked at Kansas last year may not work this year. They definitely have found that out. Of course, with Bristol, they thought Bristol at the same time with the track, oh, we're back to concrete. It's going to be great. We're not going to have any problems. Ate up the tires. And, NASCAR really has not had that much trouble with the tires. And there technically wasn't that big of a deal with the tires so much. I think at Bristol, it was just a fact of how can these drivers adapt to what I feel like is changing conditions? How do they drive? I think common sense tells me that if I'm driving at 100 and some miles an hour around Bristol and, my tires are using up, that means I need to slow down. somebody else somewhere along the line is going to either end up losing a tire, or they're going to end up slamming into the wall because they've sped too much on the tire. Just kind of lay in wait and be ready for, the victory, or at least try to come through and stay out of trouble. But that's the kind of season we're having so far. I mean, it's been one of those things, and on that note, Bristol Motor Speedway comes up with some of the greatest promotions I've ever seen for Speedway children's charities. Of course, they have the Speedway and Lights down here at Bristol and everything come Christmas time. But, they ended up, if I'm not mistaken, they ended up selling out of special jars full of the rubber, the stuff that came off the tires and everything, as a, just a fundraiser for Speedway children's charities. $50 a jar, and they sold out of them. And I think they're supposed to have maybe a few more that they're going to make available to the public. But hey, that's some smart thinking right there. Take all the old rubber off the track. Just don't go and put it somewhere. Just go and resell it to the public and sell it in a jar, and sell it. Hey, we've got jars here. We got jars of the marbles from Bristol. People buy it up. They do.
I could speak to that. I've got a piece of the national championship floor that
Mm-hmm.
Virginia won on in 2019, the national basketball championship from a few years ago. It's just a little chunk. It's not even a whole jar
Yeah.
full. It's just a little sliver. But people like that stuff. I do, so
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that. And I'm just seeing something here, Rod. A fun
Okay.
comment from Buescher after the race. He posted on Twitter about the finish there. He said he should have pulled a Lightning McQueen and stuck out his tongue to win that race. I think that's
That's
that's,
good.
that's just emblematic from the movie Cars, of course. I think that's just emblematic of how close that race was. If the car could have stuck its tongue out, he might have gotten that extra inch and won.
Yeah, and it's one of those races too where you kick yourself and you're just kind of like, did I not have enough of a car to be able to make it across the finish line? Well, no, you just not by a second, not by this inch or whatever it was. I mean, it's just the way it all bounces, way it all came down, and that's what it did. But yeah, Lightning McQueen. Yeah, now you got me where I want to go back and I want to sit down with the grandkids and watch Cars and see what he'll do about, sticking that tongue out on the car and stuff. I wonder how many of them will maybe think about coming up with an idea for something like this if they can pass it through inspection. I don't know.
So thinking roll out there. If
Yeah.
they next time there's a 1 inch win that's out there on the track. Hey, I wanted to get your thoughts too. Last week, we shared an article with each other,
Mhm.
and there were several articles written about comments that Michael Jordan made. Of course, the team co-owner of 2311 Racing, about gosh, the current state of NASCAR and the future of
Right.
NASCAR regarding teams and their ability to to work with NASCAR to be able to make money to fund their operations. Michael Jordan was pretty critical of NASCAR, which is
Mhm.
unlike the other major sports in America, a privately owned business.
Right.
And the France family, runs it with a pretty tight fist. But Jordan speaking on behalf, I assume on behalf of a number of car owners, car team owners, saying
Mhm.
basically, it's hard for us to be able to do what we need to do to be competitive out there. Wanted to get your thoughts on that topic, and whatever reaction you may have heard from others in NASCAR.
Well, basically what I think about it is he's right. You've got the car owners out here that's going out. They've done what NASCAR wanted them to do, and that was go to a next generation car that's going to even the playing field. But then when it comes down to teams properly funded and so forth like that, you've got some teams like, gosh, who was it here? I think there was one team like a truck series team, and we're talking NASCAR altogether here. But some of these truck series teams maybe only have one couple, maybe 4 or 5 people that work full time in the office, and they go to the races and they end up having to borrow people from other race teams in order for them to be able to accomplish what they need to in the pits. As you go up through the Xfinity and through the Cup Series, the sponsorship is out there. There's no doubt about that. The sponsorship is still out there. It's a thing of whether or not some of these teams can make a little bit more money when it comes to merchandising, some other things. sort of like that NIL agreement, but taking it a little step further, I think is what it is with NASCAR. And, in one sense of this, I'm just going to be honest with you. It would be this way if it was another privately owned organization. I think they'd be trying to go and get their money the same way that NASCAR has over the last several years. And I remember that big statement that when Richard Petty and some of the drivers, maybe even Lee Petty, and they were talking about unionizing NASCAR. The big thing was Big Bill France Sr. said, there's the door, hit it. We're not going to have a union in this thing. It's got down to the point too. I think Denny Hamlin even mentioned, he said, we may not even finish this season the way that it's going. We may go on a protest and, we may not even run some of the cars. Well, that could be a problem. Here's the latest that I've heard right now. This came out at about 1:10 this afternoon. NASCAR has floated the possibility of changing a clause in its charter system. Now, this is what kind of I shake my head and scratch my head and wonder about it and says, what are you saying here? They are thinking about changing a clause in the charter system that would allow a member of the France family to buy into a team. But the idea may be scrapped after receiving pushback, according to sources. Now, this is from jski.com. It makes no sense about it whatsoever. Why would the France family want to go and buy into a team and stuff into this thing? And does that make them a stockholder in the whole thing? Does it make them a little bit more, I guess, responsible like the rest of the other drivers? I don't know. But still, the sides have been in talks to strike a new revenue sharing agreement that would start next year in tandem with NASCAR's fresh media rights agreement. Now, teams are demanding 4 terms in this new charter. 1, 45% of traditional media revenue, which includes TV, radio, whatever that consists of. Number 2, permanent charters, which I can understand that. These cars are looking for people that, we can hold these numbers. We can hold on to them as long as we have a race team, but the charters are there. Number 3, 33% of any kind of new revenue. And then number 4, greater governance powers. Now, what they're saying about the greater governance powers has to do with some of the calls that have been made ruling wise and, rule breaking and so forth. And they've had to go through this appeals process and everything. And sometimes NASCAR has said, okay, you're right, we messed up here. Or NASCAR says, nope, live with it. That's what you're going to have to deal with. We're going to dock you 200 points or whatever the case may be. While they have yet to come to terms on this whole thing, NASCAR has engaged at different times with the teams about what a deal would look like over the last 18 months, even meeting individually with many teams, despite the initial desire by Race Team Alliance, which is kind of the bargaining chip here, the bargaining group, to negotiate through its own committee. So I think from the way I understand that, they're trying to bypass the Race Team Alliance group, looking at this as a whole, and they're going to the individual teams and saying, we'd like to talk to you, find out what your needs are. That's all well and good, but in the end, all the drivers and all the teams are affected by this even more so. But now NASCAR, the last thing that I'd heard about this, NASCAR is sticking with its offer of a 7-year renewal on the charter. That's what they're sticking with right now, of the charters that make them permanent rather than make them permanent. And NASCAR has also told their teams that they don't intend to end the system and that it believes the system works better by aligning them with their all-important media deals. Now, Dale Earnhardt Jr. might have something to say about that, because I think more than anything else, it's come out that these charters are expensive. They are worth a lot of money. And Dale Jr. does not see the need of popping down, and I'm throwing a fictional number out here, if it's $1 million or whatever it might be. He can't justify throwing out $1 million when he's trying to run a multi-million-dollar operation. And if they catch fire and get lightning in a bottle, that's great. If they don't, they're in trouble. They're going to have a tough time getting sponsors, and all this stuff is going to cascade. So, they need to come to some kind of thing here. This almost reminds me, just listening to it, going over and reading this stuff, it almost reminds me of the thing that first happened when we had our first big Major League Baseball strike several years ago, about the teams revenue sharing and so forth. The Yankees, they end up getting a lot because, they're in the number 1 market in the country, so to speak. How does that affect a Cincinnati? How does that affect a smaller market? And I still don't think we've gotten all the answers to it yet. And I don't know if NASCAR is going to get all the answers to this, and the drivers. I don't know if the teams are going to get the answer to this. Maybe it's going to take a protest or a boycott or something like what Denny Hamlin's talked about. But I don't know. It's still a lot of up in the air things right now.
That 45% they're asking for of the media rights basically is generous,
Mm-hmm.
because you look at the NFL, you look at MLB, you look at the NBA, NHL, it's well in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
what the players get. So I mean, that's
Right.
in a sense that's what we're talking about here. And then another point that I thought was made in the Athletic article so well. People probably don't even think about the fact that NASCAR teams don't have permanent charters. It'd be like
Right.
the equivalent of the Dallas Cowboys not having the Jerry Jones can't have a permanent Cowboys. Like
Exactly.
the Cowboys might lose their charter and not be in the NFL. Um, I saw something else floated in that article, Rod, that I mean, you've talked about the possibility
Mm-hmm.
of a strike, and I think that seems very possible. I don't know about
Mm-hmm.
likely, but very possible. Another idea that was brought up was, all right, we'll just form our own racing league.
Yep.
And we've kind of seen that. I mean, with IndyCar breaking away, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long ago was that? That seemed like forever ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see there is money to be made with stock car racing. There's a lot of fans of stock car racing who want to watch the cars go around in circles. They don't want
Mm-hmm.
to do that, obviously. We talked about that, but um, they want to be out there every Sunday and watch races, and so I don't think people care. I don't. Me as a fan, I don't care if the name is NASCAR, if the name is some new entity. We just want to see the good drivers, the good teams out
Mm-hmm.
there doing their thing. So the idea of a rival league coming up, I don't know that that's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and I kind of look back on this too. There was years ago when Bruton Smith was alive. Bruton Smith was buying up all these different tracks. We saw Rockingham, we saw North Wilkesboro go by the wayside. They kind of fell off the circuit. But there were people saying for a long time that I think Bruton Smith wanted to kind of create his own racing league, so to speak. And then he would have it featured at his tracks. And, he had several tracks. And then if NASCAR wanted to continue, they'd have their own tracks and they could, race their races on their own sanctioned tracks. But for short, it would split the difference, is what it would do. It would split things up, and it would cause, to me, I think it would just cause some hard feelings,
Yeah.
a lot of hard feelings with some people. You race on this circuit, but you won't race on ours. What's the problem? Well, you don't give us enough money. There's where one thing sticks out. So and so it's like the old days in one way. You go to the racetrack that's going to pay you out the bigger purse for making the trip down there. And so here we are. We're saying the same thing over now with NASCAR. And it's like, let loose of some of this money. Let loose of some of this money, because actually it's sort of like an NIL agreement. Because when I said this, 45% of traditional media revenue, name of sponsor is on there, no matter what it is. The drivers always get their sponsor names in one way or the other in post race or in pre race ceremonies. Something like that happens. Then, of course, you've got name, or you got your image, which, of course, is either on television or, for that matter, on any other kind of special thing that they have that's going out on this. It's really touchy. We're in a situation, I think, of where people are looking for enough bang for their buck, and they're wondering if they're getting that bang for the buck. And some of the drivers and some of the teams feel like, no, they're not getting the bang for the buck. And NASCAR's kind of oblivious to this whole thing about whether or not these teams are making money. At one time, it used to be that if a car owner and somebody like that had a decent car, and they'd race in and week out, and they came to a particular track. It was always told that the France family and NASCAR would kind of steer a little bit of a sponsorship somebody's way, and to convince somebody, hey, why don't you run on this 4 car this week, or why don't you run on this car? And it would work. For some people it would. And then other people got the idea, oh, I can spend $25,000 and have my name on a quarter panel and put it back here in the back, and then they're a loser, team, and they don't have any kind of possibility. Pitiful return on your revenue. I mean, pitiful return, period. And so I see where the drivers are coming from. They want some money back, and some of these teams are wanting some money back out of it because they're both hand in hand in this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't see that this gets resolved, unfortunately, too easily. The both sides are leveraging right now. They
Hmm.
the NASCAR says we have the established brand name, we have the tracks, we have the marketing muscle, etc. And the drivers and teams, the teams even more than the drivers say, but we do all the hard work out here.
Yeah,
We're the ones, putting the millions toward this. The article mentioned that Rod, you talked about this earlier. The next gen car was supposed to standardize things. It was also supposed to lower the cost for the teams, but apparently
exactly.
that's not been the case.
That's not. It
I
hasn't been
want
the
to.
case.
The figure was something like $18 million a year to
Hmm.
do this, and the know how is so different, and also I guess the cars can only uh you know uh, run so many races before they need to be replaced. I mean, there's
Right.
all these factors that go into this. Teams had to sell off their old equipment for pennies on the dollar because it just
Hmm.
wasn't compatible with the new cars. I mean,
Right.
there was so much that the teams bore in terms of cost just to go to the next gen, that they haven't gotten a return on.
Yeah, and you've got teams that have been, even though they've been successful in the past. Toyota's one of them. I'll jump at it. I'll say Toyota, there for a while, the first couple of years of this next generation car, you saw who dominated. It was Ford and Chevrolet. They pretty much dominated altogether. But here is another thing that I kind of look at with this. Um, I look at this whole picture right now of the selling pennies on the dollar and everything and changing. Yeah, it was supposed to be a cheaper alternative for some of these teams, because they were not going to have to go and they were not going to have machine shops, so to speak, and bore out their own, transmissions or whatever, or the engine blocks or whatever that they needed to do. This stuff would come in from the factory, and it would be everybody has the same thing. It goes to a Toyota, or it goes to a Ford, it goes to a Chevrolet. Um, they're finding ways of, yes, and I'm going to say this, they're finding ways to tweak and cheat, if you want to call it that way. Some things have slipped by, some things probably haven't slipped by. Not like it was years ago when I saw a picture the other night of Earnhardt, and I'm serious, Dale Earnhardt Sr. There, and they were going through inspection, and Earnhardt's got his foot underneath the front air dam, and he's got his foot lifted up to kind of hold that air dam up just a little bit for it to pass inspection, if that's the case. Um, Everything's been done one way or another, and I think they tweak at it a little bit. Kevin Harvick wants more horsepower on some of these cars. He feels like that's another thing that they have taken a beating on, of slowing the cars down. I know people will say, well, they're going fast. They're going 190 miles an hour, but it's still not the same kind of horsepower that these cars need. Like at Talladega, they go and they get all. You think they get bunched out, but they get bunched up is what they do, and they get bunched up, and you really can't figure out who's got to have the clean air, or who has the better advantage on clean air when they're racing like this. So, yeah, it was supposed to even up the playing field, but it's muddied up the water just that much more.
Well, that's been a good discussion here. The race this weekend in Darlington, and we I think we covered one of the greatest races in the history of the sport
Hmm.
just this past weekend, yesterday, as it turns out. And these big issues. Let's hope we get to finish this season.
Yeah.
And, let's hope they can work out all the money. There's a lot of money to be made here. Let's see if we can figure all that out. But hey, Rod, it's been a fun conversation, and I hope our listeners out there got a lot from it. As always, Rod, thanks for your time, your insight, and look forward to talking to you next week.
All right. Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.